For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button because we are just getting started.
Yeah, based on everything that you're saying, I've found that the critics or the skeptics, they kind of lack a counter rebuttal when it comes to the evidence, and obviously, as you're pointing out, ad hominems and personal attacks don't count. So what we see today in terms of uniformitarian processes, they can't actually explain the geological features of the Earth. So one argument that I've heard them point to over and over again is because they don't have any counter rebuttal to all the evidence suggesting a global worldwide flood, right? They'll say that these catastrophic processes during the flood, the fountains of the Great Deep breaking open, catastrophic plate tectonics, for example, they'll assert that a tremendous amount of heat is being produced from these processes, that it would preclude a global flood because this heat would boil the oceans, essentially, melt the crust, and kill Noah and the arks due to the radiation. Now, I know there's a lot of creation scientists working on this, so it's probably a question that could take a couple-hour lecture. Yeah, of itself. But I'm curious, what are your specific thoughts on that objection that they point?
Okay, you are right. There's no one quick answer that I can just spill out and it's definitive and positive. But then that's fine. That's not a problem. There's so many problems from a secular point of view with deposition and so on and so forth. Anyway, as in you wouldn't physically get what we see around us if it was so. That there's going to be objections and issues on the creationist side as well. And the flood heat problem, as it's known, is a real problem. It's a genuine problem, and like you say, there are many creationists working on it. So I'm pretty sure we've got an article, a very in-depth article about it on the Ask site, so go there and have a look. Plus you can find stuff on Answers in Genesis and so on and so forth. My brief comments, and they will be brief because like you say, it could be a 2-hour lecture. Right. We have been doing some good research into the production of oil and coal. Particularly the process behind the production of oil and coal, and we have been producing oil and gas, natural oil and gas, in a matter of weeks, and natural coal in a matter of days. Right, using specific plants and so on and so forth, putting them in natural environments, controlled environments, but natural environments, and watching them go to work. And what's interesting is a lot of the fast production, because again the standard production of oil and coal is a swamp-like environment where you have trees and whatever settle into the ground where they've been living and dying and slowly building up peat, which over time very slowly gets compressed. Now there's a whole series of issues with that, and we could get into all of them, including the fact that the majority of plants found in coal measures do not come from swamp-like environments. But like I say, don't have time to get into that. But if you want to produce coal quickly, if you want to produce oil quickly, there definitely seems to be a specific process which is connected with it. And the process requires heat. So we've done different tests in different backgrounds, in different temperatures, and things with more heat produce coal, oil, and natural gas way quicker, sometimes in the order of hours, if you add a certain amount of heat to them. Now, all around the Earth, if you interpret the geological record, or the vast majority of the geological record, particularly the vast majority of coal, oil, and natural gas deposits to a global flood, as I do, as many other creation scientists do, and there's a lot of evidence for that we've discussed in this program and the last program, and John has discussed, and you can go back through our website and SOT and so on and so forth and find out the evidence for it. There are a huge amount of coal and oil deposits. Now, I did a calculation somewhere, and I can't remember the exact details. I'll put them up. I can put it up on the comments later, which was calculating based on modern day production of plants and so on and so forth, basing that in a flood, and then making the point that before the flood there would have been plenty enough of organic material in plants and animals to produce this amount of coal and oil and so on and so forth. And that's a fascinating study in itself, but I don't want to misquote my research, so I'll put it up separately. But the point was there's plenty of material to produce coal and oil. However, you still need a mechanism to produce it in the space of a flood. Well, if our research is correct, and I say we're still in the early stages of it at the moment, but if our research is correct, then there is a definitive connection between heat and coal and oil production. Now, in a global flood scenario, lots of tectonic activity, lots of things, lots and lots of heat, hence the flood heat problem. However, what you do have is the perfect environment to actually absorb an incredible amount of that heat in the form of a chemical and physical process which is connected to producing coal and oil. So I'm not saying that that is the answer. I'm saying that we think that that could be an answer, and we will certainly continue investigating it because of the connections with coal and oil and rapid formation and so on and so forth, and that's a fascinating study as it is. But if we are proven to be right, or certainly find evidence for that, you may well have a good piece of evidence explaining the flood heat problem, as in you've created an enormous battery, if you like, which sucks up the vast majority of the heat, or certainly enough heat to avoid the heat problem, in the form of coal and oil production. And that would also explain how we could get the huge amounts of coal and oil produced in the space of a 1 year or soon after that 1 year flood. So there's a few thoughts. Like I say, the critics will probably tear it to shreds, and that's fine. We're in the early stages of this, but there are certainly enough issues with the secular interpretation of the geological history on the Earth that we're valid a few objections ourselves, or issues ourselves. But I think the more we do research into this, the more we will actually see there's a perfect explanation for it. And me personally, I highly suspect it has something to do with the formation of coal, oil, and basically the carbonization process, or the change into carbonites. So they're my thoughts.
Yeah, that's a great. Actually, George, I got a couple thoughts on my mind if I can get them out real quick before I lose them. But that's a great answer, phenomenal answer, and exactly, no model's perfect. And as you're pointing out, heat and energy would then be features of the flood, and not necessarily. Yeah. Obviously not necessarily a bug like the critics want to say. I've also heard that particular lines of evidence, and I know George can speak to this as well, that seem to indicate accelerated nuclear decay has occurred in the past, like radio halos and fission tracks come to mind. I've heard that they
whole different topic,
And I've heard that those lines of evidence, those scars in the rocks themselves, would not actually exist if there was as much heat as the critics suggest, because the excess heat would have obliterated those lines of evidence. So I've heard that too, which means, rapid cooling or these types of mechanisms that you're talking about that could mitigate the heat are plausible. So, and I apologize, George.
I just said briefly, you go ahead, George.
I was just going to bring in two other points with regards to the heat. I mean, science has shown that there's a substance called Ringwoodite, and apparently from, I guess they've calculated it in some way. They've determined that 1.5 to 2.5% of the Ringwoodite would contain water, and they estimate something like 3 times as much water is contained in Ringwoodite as exists in the oceans today. So that's another area where you could get heat absorption because of the specific heat absorption of water. But also we did a stream some time ago, Joe, with Steph Harina. He's done quite a bit of work on salt domes and the magmatic nature of salt domes. Effectively, it's molten salt. And when you look at it and you look at the geometry of the shape of the salt domes, you have to ask yourself, how could that molten salt go through those those hard rock layers and form in that shape? There's only one way that could happen. Those layers had to be moist. Otherwise, you would never get that shape forming.
Yeah. And I think, honestly, I mean, I say there's not a one quick answer to the flood heat problem, and I don't think there ever will be. I think it will be a mixture of different things, like you mentioned, the radio halos and so on and so forth, and the salts, and on our part with the coal and stuff. I think it's going to be a mixture of different things, and that's because we have different scientists working on them. I mean, my background, like I say, is paleontology or paleobiology, specifically earth science, looking into sedimentation and recreating paleo environments and animals and so on and so forth like that, right? That's not only my academic background, it's also my main interest, right? So I'm going to be looking more into that. So when I'm doing investigation and when we're doing coal and oil and so on and so forth, that's where we're mostly looking at. Whereas the people who spearhead radio halos like Snelling or so on and so forth, they are not as much sedimentary geologists as they are geophysicists. I mean, Andrew Snelling's PhD was in geophysics, right? And in radiocarbon stuff and radioactive stuff and radio halo. So he's going to be looking a lot more into that, and Larry Vardman and the whole sort of rate people as well, you know. And so different geologists are going to be coming at it from different points of view based on their own knowledge and based on their own interests as well. So I think that ultimately, I mean, science is not whether you are a secular scientist or whether you're a creation scientist is not a one answer job. You know, there's often many different facets that actually get brought into an answer or something, because you are reconstructing a history of the past, and there are going to be mistakes when you do that. There are going to be issues when you do that. The question is, what do you take as your authority? Do you take a pagan idea at its roots, which has become philosophized into a point which has been primarily to reject scripture and be anti-religion as your starting point, which has birthed the foundations of what is considered now geology and dating methods and so on and so forth? Or do you take the Bible? I mean, both of them come from religious standpoints, there's no doubt about that, but to claim that it's purely objective is simply false. So there's going to be lots of issues, there's going to be lots of contradictions and stuff as you go through, and issues and debates, and that's great, let's go for it. But as I say, it's not going to be, I don't think it's ever going to be a one quick answer, you know, oh, here's the answer to that kind of thing. But I think there's going to be a multifaceted answer to it, and I'm pretty convinced that there's going to be something to do with so if it's not coal or oil, although I'm pretty sure that it will be, there'll be something which can absorb large amounts of heat very quickly, and that energy is transferred. The heat energy is being transferred into a chemical and physical process, which basically is carbonization. It turns one form of carbon into another form of carbon. That's it at a very simple level.